Hi, everybody, Jeff Allen again here, and I'm going to go through, this is the Working with the Germans book, and I'm going to go through and talk about now a different, um, I talked about Melissa Lamson's traits. Got the sunlight here. I'm trying to get out of the sunlight, the window. I can't get the deal with the sun here. I can't, no shutters, no windows here, so I got to have to deal with the sun here. I'm trying to get the sun bouncing off my forehead and my nose into your face. Um, the the reference here I'm going to talk about now, I already talked about Melissa Lamson's ones. I'm not going to talk about um, Garrett Hofstede and all, and there were several authors to this. It was called, for I recall, the six dimensions of national identity. Kind of really interesting topic, and they have a whole website on this, um, and the cultural compass they call this too. But the first one that I want to kind of deal with here is the whole concept of you know individualism versus, or I want to say this is the first one. This is the one of the ones in that order. I'm making these in whatever order right now because so I can talk about it quickly. So individualism versus collectivism. Okay, and what happens in this collectivism thing here, that you've got a lot of cultures that are going to have the there's going to be the cultural traits of being able to deal with the kind of the individual kind of how do they see their own um, kind of the collectivism thing here. And what it is you've got um, you've got you've got cultures that are individualistic, and we've got cultures that are collectivist or into collectivity. And the individualistic ones are ones that you determine your future, you determine what you pay for, you determine what you're going to get benefits from, you determine all this thing, and you are actually the determinant of your destiny, right? You are the determinant of your destiny. Versus the collectivity or collectivism is that it's the family and the unit, the family group, the tribe, the that is the actual identity, and who's going to help do it for the future. In the future, you have to do it's all based on loyalty, right? So the loyalty to the family, to the tribe, to the group, to the mass. And so you're going to see, of this national identity thing, we could actually say that this corresponds in general, in general, individualism corresponds to a lot of capitalistic kind of approaches, and the the collective approach applies much closer to both socialistic and communist kind of approaches. I don't want to be careful just labeling these things, but I just kind of make some general kind of principles that kind of are easy to kind of outline here and figure and follow. So social states or socialistic states that have a socialistic kind of thing, and communist states or countries leadership and approaches tend to fit within that whole collectivism thing, the whole collectivity, and being and where the individual is no longer important, it's the group, right? A little more the group, and you got to be careful too in saying socialistic and communist, because they're kind of because actually a lot of socialistic states, the socialist states, socialistic or socialist, they're still capitalistic too, right? But it's what's the focus of that? It's the focus on the community, the group. And so the Germans tend to be individualistic. And there are other cultures like the Americans too, very individualistic. In fact, the English can be very individual too. Hey, Brexit didn't, that showed it. Americans are very much that way, right? Um, but the Germans tend to be individualistic, and they want to determine the future. They got to know their future. They want to determine this, and they want to be the determiners of that. Although they're in a socialist kind of environment where there is collectivity, and they want to benefit from the collectivity, and they want to have everyone have good wages and that stuff. So I mean, it's not all completely either or, right? But there's this kind of focus on this, and I think that's really important to see. And I think it's good to just understand that within the boundaries that these things work. And I got to be careful. Germans, you can talk about boundary conditions. I'm not talking about boundary conditions here, okay, or criteria conditions. I'm talking about boundaries of within boundaries that you work within, okay. Boundary conditions are a different thing. Um, the but it's kind of really important to see how this whole thing of individualism, which will come out in other cultures too. It's just the Germans are very determined and actually are individualistic and believe in their own. You can see this like they really invest in a lot of things for their own personal use, like motorcycles and long-term investments. And that'll come up through none of these other traits too. Long-term investments that are for the individual, right? Although they do pay taxes to have the collectivity, right, for the socialistic things, and they value that too. They value it and benefit from it, right? So collectivity of education. So the Germans, although they're individualistic or individualists, still are collectivists because they actually pay. They want education to be free. So it's kind of this hybrid, right? The Germans on this. Because the Americans, on the other hand, are very individualistic to the point that everything's capitalistic. You buy everything, and you got to pay for everything yourself, and you invest in things you want for yourself, and only that. And you go to actually schools, you got to pay for the schools, and everything's got to be expensive to pay for it, right? So the Americans are actually the most extreme, one of the most extreme examples of being individualist or individualism, compared to the Germans, which are more individualist than they are socialist, communist. I mean, collective, right? Um, so it's a spectrum, right? It's a whole spectrum. It's not completely either or. It's kind of a how much, right? That's not a quantity. It's not so much a qualitative yes or no. It's a quantity about how much along the spectrum it is, right? The slider, think of it as a volume slider, right? How much, the percentage, right? Or a dial, right? How much do you turn it up to back and forth? Or a fader, how much back or forth? A fader in the car, right? You turn the fader, plus is bass, minus is treble, right? How much do you get this, right? So Germans tend to be more individualism than they are collective, but they are collective because they've got some traits that are collective, right? About education, health, that's collective, right? It's a collective group thing. Um, so they tend to be more individualistic, and that comes out in a lot of different things that you see. Individualism is a lot about. I mean, we'll see too in one of the other traits how this comes out in other points too. But it really is interesting to see and to work with them. So they will tend to work well with as an individual's culture or the national identity. They will cut national traits. They will tend to work with Americans pretty well and German and English pretty well, but will struggle with the French. They will struggle with Chinese, and they will struggle with Indians from East India, the subcontinent. They'll struggle, and Africans and Caribbeans, who will have a much more collective kind of approach in general. Okay, I'm not saying it's always that way, but in general. So so it's always a challenge, let's say, for everyone else to work with the Germans, and then for some cultures with the Germans and some others, and then the Germans to work with other cultures that are less on this individualistic type of approach, right? So that's the chapter on individualism versus collectivism, coming from Hofstede and all, in their works on, the six dimensions of the six cultural dimensions of national identity. Okay.